Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So thanks, Bill. That was great to hear an update on Data One. And so while Bill was talking primarily about education of scientists, I'm from an iSchool with strong history in library and information science, and we've been working very hard to educate information professionals to make contributions to data-intensive science. So I'm going to sort of give you some of an overview of what we've been doing in terms of the background and the coevolution of our various programs and how they've been informed by the research we've been doing. I'm going to spend a bit of time in particular on lessons we've learned from a new program where we're putting students in field experiences in large data centers at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. And then talk a little more about the various research projects that are feeding into our curriculum and the emphasis on trying to really understand and help support the reuse of data. And then share with you some new trends that we've identified in the placement of our students since we started this program. So here's an overview of what we've been doing since about 2006. And I see the slides have Okay, well that top box is information discovery in neuroscience was the very beginning. This was an NSF project where we were in neuroscience labs doing field research. I'm a social scientist. I study information and data practices and high impact information. And we observed just many, many places for possible intervention where we could really help the labs, help the informatics centers by providing information professionals at certain points. So that's where we started our first program with NSF funding for the biological information specialists, and then quickly moved into much more of a concentration on training LIS professionals in data curation. So our science emphasis was the beginning. We then broadened out to include humanities scholarship, support of that. We did a series of summer institutes for practicing professionals, primarily sort of high-level people in research libraries who are starting to take on a lot of responsibility in their institutions. And then after that, and the thing I'm going to talk about next is the project which is called Data Curation in Research Centers. And this is where we clearly observed we can't do it all in the classroom. We've really got to get students out into the data centers to be learning on site. And so we have a pilot program there that I'll share with you. That happened around the time that I became a partner in the Data Conservancy, which was sort of a sister project to Data One. And a lot of the research from that has been feeding into the data curation in research centers. In fact, two Data One researchers, Carol Tenapier, who we already heard about, and Susie Allard, are partners in that. And then I just wanted to mention that we now are just starting a parallel program to go with the data curation, which is the socio-technical data analytics program. So students will actually be able to get two specializations, one in the curation and then one in the analytics. So I want to talk a little bit about what it means to do this kind of work at an iSchool, especially one like ours. And it really has a lot of philosophy and principles underneath it that are consistent with what we've always done. So the father of LIS education has stated some time ago that the true essence of our profession is the maximization of the effective use of graphic records. So none of that has changed. We're just moving more into data as those records. We have very strong tenets in the field about adding value for current and future use. And so a lot of the work that we do and a lot of the research we do is about how we add that value either at the institutional level or working in teams with scientists. Then another core principle is aligning the resources with the social structures, and in this case usually the social structures of the disciplines or the working teams in science. And then just the core areas of expertise in LIS, which are very consistent with what we observed we could be contributing in data-intensive science, is how do we provide, collect, preserve, provide access for user communities. And here we draw on our deep studies of information behavior, representation and retrieval of information. And then how do you actually build collections and provide services around that? Another big emphasis in our field has been, historically, has been how the field as a meta-science. So there's a handful of fields who probably consider themselves meta-sciences, where it really is about providing access within fields, but also across fields. So library and information science, people talk about education, journalism, those are also fields that work across. And this is very much in the tradition of what a research library provides or a national library, what we now seeing our institutional repositories at higher education institutions doing. Also, a key tenet is the promotion of sharing and interoperability, again, across institutions and across fields. Research libraries have been building consortia for decades and decades and decades, trying to figure out the most effective ways to share and provide access to scarce and unique resources that not everyone can own. And so we're really trying to bring some of that expertise in, but also really understanding that now that we're in this era of data-intensive science, that we have really new challenges associated with that. There's a much larger ecology of all the institutions and professionals that need to contribute. And so we're trying to figure out exactly how we build these networks to get our students exposed and embedded in those networks to be part of this larger ecology of collaboration. Lots of people have talked about this. Mackenzie Smith, Saeed Chowdhury, who's the PI on Data Conservancy, and there's a new paper out by Mark Parsons and Peter Fox about this ecology. And I think it's very important. I don't always think it's the right metaphor. Sometimes I think it's more of an economy than an ecology. But again, we know we have a role to play in figuring out the best place to do that. So what we've been doing is, with those research projects you saw across the top, we have a lot of partners, and we also have a lot of advisors sitting in very important institutions. So we've been working very hard to leverage those institutional partners to get our students out into the different environments to experience and learn on the job. And so I'm going to talk in some length about our work with the National Center for Atmospheric Research. But this is just a list of some of the internship sites where our students have gone to work, and some of the practicum sites. And then the ones that I put the asterisk on are the ones we've drawn in from our research projects, who were either full collaborators in research development projects or were advisors to us in some way. And so again, building that larger network of education, research, and actual implementation with these kinds of organizations has been very, very important for us to understand where our contributions are, but also for us to get exposed to the current best practice out in the field in places like this. So the project I want to talk about in a little bit of depth is the Data Curation Education and Research Centers project. This is funded by IMLS. Again, our Data One partners, Carol Tenopir and Susie Allard, are involved in this. And this was really, this has been our attempt to try to understand how to build a model for graduate education that fully embraces sort of core curriculum, but also placement out in field sites. And the site that we're experimenting with is NCAR at this point. And so far, we've just finished our second year. We had our master's students out in the field at NCAR this summer. There were 3 students from Tennessee and 1 from the University of Illinois. And we started with an intensive workshop there that brought everyone together. Data One actually was a big part of the presentations there. And then the students stayed for 7 weeks for an internship experience. Next year, our doctoral contingent will have 3 doctoral students going to NCAR, where they'll be embedded there working on identifying key research problems associated with NCAR operations, and really most likely doing their dissertations around those problems, working with the people there. So I'll talk first. I guess the biggest strength that I've seen about this model is what NCAR has been able to really help us do, and that's get the students on site and have them work not only just shadowing or observing, but having a core team that includes a data mentor who's a lead on one of the major archives within NCAR, and then also a science mentor, a scientist working on a team solving scientific problems, working in that center. And so there's a team environment that the interns experiencing. So just to give you an example of what the students did while they were there, they each had a project that they developed independently with that group. One did a data management audit in the sensing facility and really made recommendations back to them how to improve some of their management and metadata processes. Another student worked in computational and information systems laboratory and worked on reformatting data and then ingest processes. So she got that experience actually doing it, but also helping them refine and document that. Another student was responsible for getting the first social science data set ingested in the RDA, in the Research Data Archive at NCAR, and so she's very proud of that. But also a new phase for NCAR where they're really trying to work harder at integrating social science data, especially around the research that's going on. This particular project was on Latin American cities, environmental impacts, and so they really are working to integrate social science data with the climate change data. So that was a really nice experience for the student, and I think a big contribution to NCAR. And then the fourth student worked on with the Climate Data Guide. It's a published web resource, really trying to incentivize scientists in NCAR to use that resource, but also did an assessment of the metadata that's coming out of the climate model output in the various labs at NCAR, and again, sending a report back to them on how to work to really normalize that. So that was year 2, first set of field experiences. And so we've been able to do a series of assessments now that we've gotten 2 into the 4 years of the project. And so we've been able to evaluate the core curriculum, the workshop that that was the precursor to the internships, and then the internship experience. And we've had a number of surveys, we've done some focus groups, and we have some ongoing forums where people contribute. So we've gotten really strong feedback from students and from the mentors, and we have some very nice cases and documentation of real reciprocity, where students are able to bring some real value to the processes at NCAR while they're learning much more about this really big data-intensive environment and learning about the operations there. But we've also really identified the areas where we need to work harder and where we're now making plans to really advance. So we need to increase student preparation for the data-intensive environment. While our students did very well there, we think they can do better. We think we can have them more ready to make bigger contributions and to learn more, be ready to learn more once they get there. So we really need to be planning the internships probably 6 months, get them involved with their mentors at least 6 months before they're on site so that they're ready to launch when they get there. We really need more hands-on experience with data on, in the curriculum before they go. And our way of doing that that we want to implement is to this third point as well, to get them additional experience in the academic scientific settings on our campuses. So we hope soon to have put in place the opportunity for students to do practicum in atmospheric science labs on campus before they then go to NCAR. And really our hardest problem, but one we're getting good traction on, is how do we really sustain these partnerships with these centers in order to keep our students moving through them. Part of that is us continuing to show them that our students have value for them, also showing them that these are the kind of students they're going to want to hire, so they can see the progress that they're making and identify the students I think that can really contribute. And then also integrating, for instance, at NCAR, our job will be to integrate with the UCAR institutions. So UCAR members are very interested in now the iSchool operations and how we can have these partnerships and marry them together. So that's how we've been trying to, and I think making progress on building this network of partnerships throughout the contacts that we have and the kinds of projects we've been working on. So my other part of the subtitle that I had in my talk was about LongTail Science. And the reason I want to talk about that is a lot of our students are ending up in workplaces, and we anticipated this. This is where we feel a lot of the information science expertise is going to come into play. And lots of disciplines are already pretty self-sufficient in gathering their data and providing services around it. But on many campuses, it's a different problem. So the research operations that were part of the Data Conservancy that I was leading at Illinois, we had a couple of research teams, but one was the data practices team. And our work there has really been doing qualitative studies to advance research, but also to inform the curriculum as we're going along in our educational programs about long-tail science, complex data, heterogeneous data, how we understand how it's going to contribute, what its reuse value will be for the long term, and then trying to work that into understanding processes and principles for curation. So for those of you who don't know about the Data Conservancy, you can look that up at dataconservancy.org. And lots of contributors and lots of opportunities for us to partner in both research and education. So just in case it's unfamiliar to you or you don't have any numbers to go with the long tail, our colleague Brian Hydorn, who was at Illinois when we started the data curation programs, then went to NSF and was able to do finally some kind of quantitative analysis around how do we start to understand how big this long tail is. And so I know at the last meeting at Park City on long tail data, they started calling it the big tail. So instead of big data, not only saying big data over and over again, it's now not just the long tail, but the big tail, because it really is big. It's very big. And it's big in number. So when Brian did this analysis of NSF proposals, 80% of them fell under the $300,000 mark. His analysis indicated that most of those would be what we might call small science. It's not necessarily science-produced, instrument-driven data. A lot of it's field data, a lot of experimental data done by small teams, individual PIs, and a lot of it doesn't have a place, disciplinary home. And again, the numbers are big, 80%, but also the dollars are big. We're approaching equal amount of funding invested in these kinds of data. So we know it's worth investing in the same kinds of operations for collecting, curating it, and making it highly functional for the long term. So our research with the Data Conservancy has been to really look across as many of these sciences as we could in these in-depth case studies. And so the bigger box are the disciplines that we've been studying over the last 3 years in the Data Conservancy. And then the other box is a project where we started doing these more in-depth studies with the Purdue University libraries, and Michael Witt over there was part of that project. And so we also have access to the kinds of in-depth profiling that was done in those disciplines. And so a lot of that work is really trying to identify the utility of the smaller science data and how it needs to be curated. First, thinking about it from the producer side. So what's the utility for producers? And again, this is often very complex data packages. A given group might collect any one of these, we're calling, again, this is our language, data units. What's a unit of data that's meaningful for the geobiologists? So here we have what we're calling a site-specific time series. Very complex unit, includes spreadsheets of different kinds with averages of rock, water, chemistry measures, also a lot of microscopy imaging, annotated field photos, microbial genomic data. For them, they say, it all needs to be together. Same with volcanology, where we've analyzed their meaningful data units with what we call a rock profile. That's the physical rock, it's the thin sections they make of the rock, then the digitization of those sections, also the chemical analysis, many, many different kinds of photographs and field notes. So this is what, if we're thinking about from curatorial processes, how we want to present and bring data together, this is how we'll need to do it to maintain it from the producer side. But we're also learning an awful lot about what it means to curate data for the users. And so At the same time, we're working with our participants to try to understand, well, which of this data is the most valuable for other fields. And so this is where we really are starting to learn what the utility or the units are for reuse. And here we know we really need to be thinking about how we make accessible the components of those packages. So what you see here is just sort of an image of the volcanology, meaningful data set for the volcanologist. But of course, it's become clear already that the chemical data that's sitting in the spreadsheets is probably the most widely usable by other fields. And so these are just some of the bits of evidence we have about who might use these chemical data. So people knowledgeable about isotopes will use the different series. They identified people who are working on iron and titanium oxides, and also just the observation that the geochemical work that they know about relies much less on these other field notes and the field context that is of so much importance to the volcanologists themselves. So being able to curate the groups together, but also making them available separately. So just another view of sort of how we think about these communities, the producer and the user communities, and how we curate for them. We know the OAIS approach is to think about the designated community. So we know who these designated communities are. They themselves can be kind of complex. For geobiology, it's microbiology, geobiology, geology. But then we can also identify the potential user communities through our investigations with these scientists. And here, with the geobiology data, we know it's chemistry, evolutionary biology. Bioprospecting and pharmaceutical companies is very big on this data. U.S. Park Service, I'll talk about that in a minute, and also public health. And again, if we look at reuse, we're finding cases and examples where the reuse is definitely going to be with part of the unit. So in geobiology, the microbial data, we've seen how they will be assessing the presence and extent of disease in data that wasn't originally generated for that purpose. And then in volcanology, we've already had a case of the field photos being used in glaciology to look for glacier change over time. So again, part of our job as information professionals is to try to anticipate the long-term use and curate and make data available so that it will be functional for those purposes. How am I doing on time? Oh dear. Okay, so I'll skip over this really quickly. So our work has been largely on those kinds of communities and reuse, but also how do we understand value and use over time. Our colleagues at the National Snow and Ice Data Center have been really, really good for us to try to understand this. They're starting to predict these 30-year trends in use of data. So something like their glacier photo collection, which they couldn't get money to digitize. No one could understand why they would want to for decades. And now that they have, it's the second most used data set they've ever had, used by all sorts of communities because it really does allow for tracking of change over time. So some of our research questions are, how do we predict the data over time? And then also there's been a lot of discussion and statements sort of out there. People really have a sense that the value of data may increase with their use. But again, how do we understand how data actually do that? Do they really improve in value?
Sorry, can I just ask a quick question? Did it get digitized and then sat for a while not being used and all of a sudden there was a spike?
So I have I didn't include, I have a figure that has that. And it's not an empirically generated figure. It's a figure that Ruth Durr did, in talking to me. But really it was the data collection, it gets deposited, but the data collection isn't done, right? So it keeps getting added to. So it's going up while it's getting added to. And then it sort of, gets pretty high for 5 years maybe after it's finished. And then it goes way down. And then she's saying 30 years later, you start to see it uptick. And she thinks now, if we track, that after 30 years, it'll actually go higher than the original data use. So very good question. And I wish I'd put that, because I usually have that slide right after this one, but I don't. OK, so anyway, we've been looking then at, so what value indicators. Can we understand from our case studies what the indicators are of value for a data set? Here are some of the indicators we've identified from these different fields. And then the ones that I put the asterisks next to are the ones are associated, we've discovered since then, going back now and looking at our indicators, are associated with systems geobiology. And so we have a brand new project studying trying to generate processes, principles, policies, and processes for site-based curation at Yellowstone National Park, where it's a mecca of data collection for systems geobiology, where they're studying research questions, everything from the origins of life up to life, life on other planets. And the research on the policy and the principles of generating curation at the site of data collection, and then getting the workflows sort of in place to get them into a repository like the Data Conservancy will be the research and development. But again, the education will feed into our programs. How do we support site-based curation, and how does that complement the work at repositories? For geobiology, our leaders there will be taking those curation principles and feeding them into undergraduate and graduate programs in geobiology. So the students that are learning geobiology and how to collect data at Yellowstone and elsewhere will be getting this. And then at Yellowstone National Park, they have a lot of educational programs, but our work will be to build awareness with the scientists working there and educate them on how to be really contributing to that curation. So what's happening in our program? We have the specialization in data curation. It started, our first year of actual offering was 2007, so we've had it in place for a while. We've got 55 graduates out of that program. We've been able to track 49 of them since the first one graduated in 2008. And this is what we're seeing. It's pretty interesting because I think we didn't really think about exactly where they would end up, but 33% have ended up in research libraries or museums, so places like Library of Congress, Newberry Library, Art Institute of Chicago. Remember, we do humanities as well as science. But 20% are going into data centers. I think this will go up now that we're really working to get the internships in place. But we've got people at USGS and the Illinois equivalent. We have someone at Woods Hole. We have 2 or 3 that have gone to NSIDC, and also to a couple of the humanities research centers. And then about 20% going to industry so far. And I'll stop here, but this is sort of a sample of some of the job titles that they have. Again, this is evolving very quickly. When we first started, there weren't any titles like this, maybe 1 or 2. People were going into programmer positions or data analyst positions or e-science librarian positions. But now we have lots of kinds of positions that are evolving sort of around these expertise and students getting placed there, which I think is very interesting. And we'll see how this evolves over time as well. So thank you very much. I don't know if I have any time for questions.
You do.
Oh,
any questions for Karen?
Thanks.